We continue now at the top of Daf Chesam and Aleph and Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 8a. And the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the soyer hanasa bifnim, that it said again in the Mishnah, it said that it is mechaper, it provides an atonement for tumah. And the Gemara brought a brisa which said that one might have thought that what does it mean tumah? It means avodah zarah, gilui arayos, and shvichas damim. One might have thought it's an atonement for that. And the Gemara is continuing to question this. The Gemara says gilui arayos nami. When it comes to gilui arayos also, what exactly do we mean to say that one might have thought that the soyer hanasa bifnim and Yom HaKippurim could be a kapara for that? Hey chidami, what exactly would be the case? Ibemezid, if the person was committing the sin of gilui arayos bemezid on purpose, so then bar ketalo, so then he's liable to the death penalty. So there is a punishment over there. So what would it mean that you get a kapara from the sar hanasa bifnim? And ibeshogeg, and if the person did it by mistake, bar karbanu, so then there's a carbon that is supposed to be brought. So again, what is the scenario where one might have even thought that that was what the kapara was for? And the Gemara answers as it did before with regards to avodah zara, b'mezid v'lo asrubei, it could be talking about on purpose where there's no warning, there's no death penalty in such a case, or b'shogeg v'lo esyadale, we could be talking about when it was done by mistake and the person never found out about it, so he's not going to bring a carbon. So again, it will be the sar hanasa bifnim on Yom HaKippurim that will provide the kapara. And the Gemara continues along the same lines, shvichas damim nami, when we say murder also, what does it mean again that the sar hanasa bifnim is a kapara for that? Hechi dami, what exactly is the case? Iba mezid bar katalu, again, if he did it on purpose, he's liable to the death penalty. Iba shogeg bar golos, so if he did it by mistake, so then he's liable to go to exile. And the Gemara answers, b'mezid v'lo asrubei, the case again could be it was done on purpose and there was no warning, so there is no death penalty. B'shogeg v'lo esyadale, it could be that it was done by mistake and again the person did not know about it. And for the case of shvichas damim, you can actually have another scenario, inami or b'hanach delav b'nei golos ninu, it could be b'shogeg, but there are certain ways where a person doesn't go to golos. Again, it has to be in a situation where it's derech yirid in a downward motion and not in an upward motion, and there's other cases as well, Meseches makos, where there is no galus. So again, that could have been the havamina, what one might have thought we mean when we say the sar hanasa bifnim provides a kapara for these three cases. Again, avodah zarah, gilui arayos, and shvichas damim. But again, that is not the case. In the end, the brisa says that it's not for those things, but rather again, it's for situations of tumah. As the Gemara now continues, Amar Mar, the master said, again, we said previously, Yachol al shalosh tumas halolo yehei sar mechaper. One might have thought that it was on these three tumas that the sar hanasa bifnim is mechaper. Again, one might have thought it's for avodah zarah, gilui arayos, and shvichas damim. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says mitumos, from the impurities, v'lo kol tumos, not all impurities, and therefore the brisa again continued, ma motzinu shachilek hakosam mechlal kol atumos. Where do we find that the Torah says something distinct, something that is different when it comes to this tumah from other tumas? But tumas mikdash v'kadashav, we find that by tumas mikdash v'kadashav, afkan, so too over here again, when it comes to the sar hanasa bifnim, what is it mechaperan? It's betumas mikdash v'kadashav. We're talking about tumas mikdash v'kadashav, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. And so now the Gemara wants to clarify what exactly does it mean that we find that there's some kind of distinction when it comes to tumas mikdash v'kadashav. Ma'achi, like what is this distinction that we find by tumas mikdash v'kadashav? Demaisi ba'olav yored, we find that there's a carbon olav yored. Normally you don't bring an olav yored. It is specifically by tumas mikdash v'kadashav, by yediyas hatuma. Again, a person became tama and he ate kodesh or he went into the Beis HaMikdash. You bring this carbon olav yored, which is again a kind of a carbon chatas, which is on a sliding scale depending on how wealthy you are. That's the kind of carbon that you bring. That's a unique aspect by tumas mikdash v'kadashav, and therefore that also is what we are talking about when we talk about the sar hanasa bifnim, that it provides that kapara. Again, that's talking about a situation where you didn't know that you committed the avera, so you didn't bring the carbon olav yored. It was talking about where there's yediyah b'tchila, no yediyah basof, and so then we say that the sar hanasa bifnim suspends the person from yisurin. There's not going to be any afflictions. He'll have that kind of temporary kapara. When he finds out that he committed the sin, then he brings the carbon olav yored. As Rashi explains, the maisi olav yored ushar shigagas avera b'carbon kavua. Generally speaking, when you have shogeg by an avera, when you do it by mistake, you bring a carbon kavua, you bring a set carbon chatas. You don't bring this sliding scale, this olav yored carbon. And the Gemara continues, Ema avodah zarah, if we're looking for something that is unique, and that's what the pasuk is talking about when it says the sar hanasa bifnim provides a kapara, maybe we should say it's avodah zarah. And in what way is avodah zarah unique? Umay chilik, in what way is there a distinction by avodah zarah? The maisi seira v'lo kisba. When it comes to avodah zarah, you have to specifically bring a goat. You cannot bring a sheep, and so therefore that is something unique by avodah zarah. And again, maybe that's what the kapara is when it comes to the sar hanasa bifnim and Yom HaKippurim. As Rashi explains, the maisi seira v'lo kisba, you bring the soyer and not the kisva, not the sheep. sheep, uveshar krisos by other cases of kares, o kisba o seira, you have a choice. You could bring either the sheep or the goat, and so again, maybe that is what is unique. That's what the pasuk is referring to. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Kahana says, Anon chilek lohakel kamrin, and we're looking for some kind of distinction that is a distinction lakula. When you bring a carbon ola v'yored on the sliding scale, that's a leniency. The person is able to bring a carbon that it does not cost as much money, so that's what we're looking for. V'hai chilek lahachmiru, when it comes to avodah zara, that's a distinction that's actually a stringency. It's saying you're only allowed to bring the seira and not the kisba, and so therefore we are not going to say that we're referring to avodah zara. And the Gemara continues, Ema yoledis. Well, maybe we should say it's talking about a yoledis. A yoledis is a woman who gives birth. Now Rashi over here explains, Ve'ema yoledis, shema avar ole yom kippurim. Maybe we can suggest as follows. Let's say a woman gives birth and then Yom Kippur passes, ocheles bekachim below carbon. Normally a yoledis has to bring a carbon in order to eat kachim, but maybe we'll say that the sar hanasa bifnim can count as that carbon, and now she'll be able to eat kachim. Maybe that's what the pasuk is referring to. That's what the Gemara means when it says yoledis. The chilek the maisa olav yored, because the yoledis also is distinct, because she also brings this carbon olav yored, this carbon on the sliding scale. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hoshia says, l'chol chatosim, it says for all of their sins, v'lo l'chol tumasim, it doesn't say for all of their impurities. The point over here is that the yoledis is not a chota, she's not somebody that sinned, we're talking about somebody that committed a sin. Rashi explains, v'lo l'chol tumasam, the carbon yoledis eino bola kapara, when a yoledis brings a carbon, she's not bringing that for atonement, ela tahara mitumasa lachol bekachim. That's just in order to purify her from her impurity, in order that she can eat kachim, and therefore that cannot be what the pasuk is talking about. But the Gemara continues, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. But according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, to Amar yoledis nami chotes, he happens to say that a yoledis is considered to be a sinner. So maybe according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, maybe again that is what the pasuk is talking about. According to him, Ma'ikol Amemra, what are we going to say according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai? The Gemara says that's not a problem at all. Rabbi Shimon l'taimi, because Rabbi Shimon will follow his reasoning. He learns it out from the context of the pasuk itself. He doesn't have this source. He learns out from the context of the pasuk itself that it is talking again about the Yediyas Hatoma case and not a case of Yoledes, and so therefore it's not a problem according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. And Rashi explains, Yoledes chotes he, again, according to Rav Shimon bar Yochai, the woman who gives birth is considered to be a sinner. Why is that? Shekeshokoras leilid, because when she's giving birth, she's in so much pain, nishbaz shalot tizokek labala. She then takes an oath that she's never going to be together with her husband again, because she doesn't want to be put through that pain, and that's considered somewhat of a sin. So again, that was the Gemara's question. According to Rav Shimon bar Yochai, maybe this drasha, which is chilek, is referring to Yoledes, and the Gemara says that's not true anyhow, because mimakomahu muchra, according to Rabbi Shimon, he says it's learned from the context of the pasuk itself. He doesn't need this drasha of chilek, which we are dealing with over here. And the Gemara continues, V'ema mitzora. So why don't we say that what's chilek, what is distinct, where we can say the sar hanasa bifnim provides a kapara? Maybe we're talking about a mitzora. Again, by mitzora also, we wouldn't actually be talking about a kapara, but we're talking about the purification process of a mitzora. And the Gemara again answers the same as by the Yoledes. Amar Rav Hoshia says, L'chol chatosam v'lo l'chol tumasam. Again, it says it has to be for a sin. The mitzora, it's a purification process from the impurity, from the tumah, and so therefore that cannot be what the pasuk is talking about when it's referring again to chilek by the sar hanasa bifnim. But the Gemara continues to Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani diamar. But what about according to Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, who says al shiva devarim negoim boy, and he says that negoim saras comes because of 7 things, and the idea is that there is a sin involved. So ma'ikol memar. So what are you going to say? And the Gemara continues and explains hasam over there nigei da chaperle over there. Even according to Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, it is the actual nega, the actual saras, which provides the atonement. The carbon lishtaruye bekal. The only reason you bring the carbon is to be permitted to enter the congregation, to enter the community, and so therefore again that's not really a situation of kapara for a sin, and therefore that is not again what we are talking about when we're talking about the soir hanasa bifnim. But the Gemara continues, ve'emon nazir tameh. Maybe we can say that the soir hanasa bifnim is really is going to work on behalf of a nazir who becomes impure. The chilek there also it's distinct. The maisi torah muvinayona, because they bring a special bird carbon torah muvinayona. they bring the pigeons and the turtle doves, and so therefore maybe again the Sor Hanasa Bifnim will replace that process, will replace that carbon. And the Gemara again says, Amar Ravoshia says, L'chol Chatosam v'lo l'chol tumasam. We're talking again, it has to be something that involves a sin, not something that simply involves a purification process. By the Nazir, it is just a purification process. Rashi explains, Ve'ema Nazir Tameh, Dechsiv, Uvayom Hashmini Yavi Shtei Sorim. Again, it says that the Nazir brings these two Torim, these two bird offerings, when on the 8th day, again, part of the Nazir's purification. And again, V'lo l'chol tumasam. The Gemara answered, we're not simply talking about a purification process, we're talking about a sin. V'chimaisi Nazir carbon, Rashi says, when a Nazir brings that carbon, that really is L'meichal Olei Nazirus Tahara. That's in order to begin the Nazir as a pure Nazir as opposed to an impure Nazir. It's part of that purification process. Maisi, that's why it's being brought. It says those first days, they fall away from the count. There has to be a certain number of days of Nazirus. The days of Tumah don't count. It's just a Gezeres HaKosav that count of the Nazirus does not begin until the carbon is brought. Again, that's not an issue of a sin, so that cannot be what we are talking about. But the Gemara continues, but what about according to Rabbi Lazar HaKafar, who says that actually a Nazir is considered to be a sinner? So maybe we could be talking about Nazir. Rashi says, and why is he a sinner? Because he's preventing himself from having wine, which is considered a sin, according to Rabbi Lazar HaKafar. So again, Ma'ikol Amemer, what are you going to say according to that view? And the Gemara answers along the same lines as before. Savar Lok Rabbi Shimon will have to say that Rabbi Lazar HaKafar holds like Rabbi Shimon, that doesn't have this drasha at all about it being something that is distinct. Rather, Rabbi Shimon again says that you learn from the context of the pasuk itself that what we are referring to is Yedias HaTumah, meaning Tumas Mikdosh v'Kadashav. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, Rabbi Shimon says, Mimakomahu Mukhra, from the context of the pasuk itself, again by the Sor Hanasa Bifnim, we can tell that we're talking about Tumas Mikdosh v'Kadashav. That's the Yedias HaTumah again that we are referring to, because Hareyu Omer, because it says V'chiper ala Kodesh mitumoso shel Kodesh v'chulu. It says that V'chiper ala Kodesh mitumos, it means the Tumah of Kodesh, etc. The Gemara in the previous Amud went through the entire drasha of Reb Shimon, how we know exactly the scenario which we are referring to. But in any case, the Gemara now says Shapir Kama Rabbi Shimon. Isn't Rabbi Shimon saying correctly? Why does Rabbi Yehuda have a drasha from another context? He brings in a drasha which relies on some other unique factor. Why not just learn it from the context of the pasuk itself? And the Gemara answers to that, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Loch, Rabbi Yehuda will say to you, this pasuk where it says V'chiper ala Kodesh mitumos, and Rabbi Shimon is darshaning mitumoso shel Kodesh, Rabbi Yehuda uses that for something else. Hahumi boy lay, that's needed for the following. Ki hechi diyovid lifnai v'lifnim, the same way, the same procedure on Yom Kippur that's used lifnai v'lifnim, which means to say in the Kodesh Kodashim, hachi navid behechol, that process is followed in the hechol as well. Rashi explains what we're referring to. Ki hechi david lifnai v'lifnim, demefarish le'el b'minyona achas lamalo v'zayin lamata midam hapor v'chein midam hasar. There are two animals that are brought on Yom Kippur. One is the par, the bull, and one is the soyer, the goat. That's the sar hanasa b'fnim that we're talking about. So the process would be that the Kohen Gadol would go into the Kodesh Kodashim and he would sprinkle there in the Kodesh Kodashim. He would do 1 in an upward motion and 7 in a downward motion from the blood. That's the sprinkling of the blood in the Kodesh Kodashim. V'asa hai v'chiper ala Kodesh. Now this pasuk of v'chiper ala Kodesh, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is coming le'esui, is coming to teach us that in the heichal sheyase kemochein al haparochas mibachutz, that exact procedure should be followed with the sprinkling of the blood also in the Kodesh when you're sprinkling towards the parochas, which was what separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim. So that's actually what this pasuk is teaching according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues for Rabbi Shimon. Now Rabbi Shimon responds to that. Where do we learn what you do in the Kodesh? Where do you learn that you do that to the parochas? Hahumi v'chein yasa nafka. That's learned from a different pasuk. It says v'chein yasa. The same should be done. Again, referring to what is done in the Kodesh Kodashim should also be done in the Kodesh. But the Gemara continues for Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda, why can't he use v'chein yasa? If you just had that pasuk of v'chein yasa, hava mina nesi par v'sar acharini v'navan. I might actually think to bring in another par and bring another soyer and do that, not to use the blood from the same par and soyer. Kamash malon. So that's why you need that v'chiper al kodesh pasuk to say that it's the same animal that's done. That procedure with the blood is done in the Kodesh Kodashim and in the Kodesh. For Rabbi Shimon responds to that, v'chein yasa la'oel moed minei mashma. When it says v'chein yasa la'oel moed, it sounds like minei from those very same animals. That's exactly what it means. And again, Rashi explains, Minei Mashma, it's from that pasuk you can see that again we mean the same animals are being used. That's why again Rabbi Shimon has v'chibra ala kodesh. That's extra for Rabbi Shimon that he's able to make that drasha. Again, Rabbi Shimon is mimakomo hu muchra. He learns from v'chibra ala kodesh mitumos. He learns out again that we're talking specifically about tumas mikdosh v'kadashav in terms of the kapara that the sar hanasa bifnim offers. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, again going back to that brisa we quoted above, Yochel al kol tumas shebekodesh yehi soyer zeh mechaper. One might think on all tumas that take place with involving kodesh and the mikdash that the soyer hanasa bifnim is mechaper. So the brisa went on to say, Talmud lomar mi pishayim l'chol chatosam. They compare it to peshoyim which are done on purpose. And now the Gemara explains what we're referring to. Mind what is the brisa over there referring to? Yesh bo yediyah betchila v'yesh bo yediyah besof. So you're talking about a case where there's yediyah in the beginning and yediyah at the end. If you're talking about yediyah in the beginning and at the end, that wouldn't make sense. Hai bar karbanu, that's a situation where you're actually bringing a carbon. So how could we ever have even thought that? In other words, the brisa had a havamina. The brisa had a thought to say that in a situation where there's yediyah betchila and yediyah besof, that would be a case also. The brisa thought where the sar hanasa bifnim offers a kapara. Again, in reality, the sar hanasa bifnim only offers a kapara where there's a yediyah betchila and there's no yediyah basof. You didn't even know you committed the sin, and so therefore again it suspends, it protects the person until he realizes there was a sin, and then he brings the carbon olav yored. The brisa was saying one might have thought that it even applies in a situation where there's yediyah betchila and yediyah basof, which the Gemara is now saying, how could you even have thought that? You're already bringing a different carbon. You're bringing the carbon olav yored. As Rashi explains, hachi garsinan mainiu yesh bo yediyah v'hachi peirusha means as follows: katani ma peshoyim she'enon b'nei carbon af chatoim. We're learning from the pasuk pshoim, that which is done on purpose, there's no carbon. So to over here it has to be something with no carbon. Umayni utuma demimit mehaikra. What are we excluding here? Hahidabas carbon. What are we excluding? Ve'ezu zushi yesh b'yediyah betchila v'yediyah basof. We're excluding a situation of yediyah betchila and yediyah basof. But the Gemara now asks, but high bar carbon. But again, if you're bringing a carbon already, the carbon olav yored, who you're bringing the carbon olav yored, v'lama lila meimar delo nechaper haisar ala. Why do we even need to say that the sar doesn't offer a kapara? You already, of course not. You already have a kapara from the carbon olav yored. What's the point of even excluding it from a drasha? It should be excluded logically. And the Gemara says, lo no tzricha, it's necessary. Let's say the person found out right when it was shkia, right when it was sunset, and therefore there was no time to bring the carbon olav yored. As Rashi says, samach l'shkia sachama, near shkia sachama, erev yom kippurim, it's on erev yom kippur, it's near shkia, v'lo hayashos l'havi karbana, there's no time to bring the carbon. So there, sal kadai techamina, one might have thought, adamaisi, that in the interim, as he is bringing it again, maybe this will have some kind of kapara in the interim, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Beis.